Hello and welcome to Mediumship Matters with me, Hannah McIntyre. And today I've got another great guest for us to hear from, Samantha Cooper, who is Mindful Mandy on TikTok, who I follow, Mindful Mandy 108.
Yes, that's
Just to
me.
be precise. And we've connected on TikTok. She makes me laugh. I think I make her laugh. We have these little interactions. And I asked her if she'd come on and share her journey with us, because I get the feeling it's been quite a bumpy ride. So welcome, Samantha. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always exciting to sit down and get to chat with other mediums. I really appreciate it. Yeah, where to start?
Yeah, well, how did you get into all this crazy shiz that is mediumship? Start there.
It's really funny because I kind of fell into it, I guess, if you would say. I mean, I always had experiences growing up as a kid, but I was raised in a Catholic household. So when I tried to tell my parents what was happening, it wasn't really met with this, like, well, let's talk about this, let's unpack this. It was more like, we're just not going to talk about that. So just kind of push it under the rug.
That's
So I
nice.
Yeah, right. I immediately felt like, okay, there's something wrong here, this is taboo, so I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. Um and of course, you kind of go through those phases in life where I always was that person for people that they would just open up to me, and they would always talk to me about their losses, and I would always have these very imaginative experiences in my mind where people would tell me a story. It felt like I could see everything as it was playing out, like a movie in my head. And it was almost like I could intuit like the end of the story, or like what they were going to say next. And I just thought that was me being, a really good guesser.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had a lot of experiences like that growing up that I didn't really think twice about. I thought everybody had that, or that was really common for other people. It wasn't until I became a nurse and really kind of went through my own struggles and grief and loss with my own family and had my own experiences that I started to become overwhelmed with my surroundings, if you will, I guess. Right. So
Mhm.
and I was kind of seeking out a way to mitigate some of the anxiety, stress that I was encountering in the work I was doing, and the grief that I had yet to process through my own losses that I had experienced early in life. And through that, I found a traditional Buddhist center that I started going to, like, a weekly meditation class.
Ah,
Yeah, so really basic Mahayana Buddhism, and kind of meditating in this more traditional Vipassana style meditation that I was kind of learning. And I did that consistently for probably, I'd say, 2 years. And it was around the 2 year mark that I started having mediumistic experiences that were really prominent. I didn't know that's really what they were, but those sort of like those intuitive sort of hits, if you
yeah.
will, or like the premonitory dreams or the premonitory thoughts, and then they would manifest or happen, shortly thereafter I would have them. It started to freak me out, and I didn't really know what to make of it. And
Mhm.
seeing someone for Reiki, and she was also a clairvoyant medium, and she had told me probably maybe 3 4 years prior, oh, you have mediumistic ability, you're going to be doing this mediumistic work in, like, professionally in like 8 years. And I laughed in her face because at that time I was like mad at God. I was in that really deep grieving space where
Yeah.
I was just like, yeah, right, like, no, that's not even something I want. Like, why would I go in that direction? And now here I am. So
Love
but
it.
yeah, that's basically how it kind of unfolded for me.
And has it helped you to reconcile your grief? There's the big question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I learned so much through self-reflection and sitting with myself and allowing myself to let things come to the surface, and giving myself the space to do that really started when I started the meditative process.
Yeah.
Um, and then the mediumship just kind of amplified everything. I started having my own experiences that uh, were undeniable, which really did help with my own grief process and processing the things that I had yet to fully move through.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh my goodness, amazing. And so when you got this, it all starts like you're cracked open. I'll just have a nice meditation. Universe goes, heck no, let's crack her open, bring in the spirit world, slap her around the face with it. How did you just, was it just natural there for you? Did you do lessons? How did you develop your own abilities?
So the first thing that I did was, obviously I read a lot of books. I had always been kind of drawn to the supernatural, paranormal. That had always really been something that had sparked my interest, but I always came at it from a very skeptical mind. So I really started by seeking out other resources to learn about mediumship in the spirit world when I thought that that may be what was happening. To be 100% honest, as someone who's so skeptically minded, I started to think that I was losing it. So I actually did talk to, I talked to a therapist, and I also talked to a psychiatrist just to make sure that there wasn't something else underlying that maybe I was predisposed to that I didn't know about that was manifesting. And it absolutely wasn't. So before I even started like truly working with someone to develop my abilities and actually looking for teachers. And it's kind of funny because I feel like they say the teacher will present itself when the student is ready. And my very first mentor, I remember it was really very serendipitous how she came into my life, but I remember seeing her and just feeling this magnetic pull to her that was almost like something I couldn't deny, or it was almost, it was weird. It was a weird experience.
Yeah.
And then at the time she wasn't teaching. She was just still very much working in the public eye. And then 6 months later, after I had found her, she opened up a mentorship. So that's when I started taking actual like lessons and learning about the mechanics of mediumship, and the foundations were laid. And that was probably, I'd say, about a year after I really started thinking, okay, this is what's going on. Let me explore this on my own. And that's when she kind of came into the picture.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I have a really analytical mind. Don't you think it helps in mediumship for evidential?
I absolutely do. I find that because of the way that my mind works and the way that I can sort of see patterns and kind of note different things, I find that it actually really helps in mediumship because I can see the bigger picture a lot more clearly, and sometimes a lot earlier on when I'm working with a communicator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think there's that kind of, because you doubt it and you want it to be proved to you, you try harder with it. And
Yes.
so you get better evidence because you're not willing to just stop at the surface. You want to push through for that real, because for me, I want it to be proved to me as much as I do the sitter. So I always hold myself really accountable for the evidence that I give. But I think that's a plus. I'm sticking with that
I
analytical.
agree. Absolutely. I agree. It's funny because I feel like I always learn something from every contact I do. I always say that
Yes.
there's something I can take away from every communication, even if it's just in a development circle or a group. There's always something to be learned. And I think I love evidential mediumship because it helps keep me grounded in reality, because I'm striving for the deepening of the evidence and also the deepening of being able to bring forward the essence of those I communicate with so that their loved ones truly feel the presence of them once again. And that only comes from being able to deepen your evidence and actually be able to tell the story that they want to tell and move yourself out of the way enough that that the information can actually flow. It's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Absolutely. It's such an art form.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as simple as being like Jennifer Love Hewitt and just frowning into space and passing on messages. I wish it was, but it isn't. So tell us, have you got any stories about times that spirit have blown your mind, or evidence you've got? Share some of your wins with us and things that you've got.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many experiences, and the truth is that I feel like I should like write them all down, because there's been so many times that it's just blown my mind. I think that one of the biggest probably eye-opening or mind-blowing experiences I had was one of the first contacts I think I ever did unintentionally, where I was working in the hospital, and I I had a nurse, a colleague that I was working with, and I knew that her father had recently passed. I was very much aware of that. However, I didn't really understand the mechanics of mediumship and how it really worked at that time, but I knew that it was something that may be happening. And I'll never forget, we were sitting at the nurse's station, and every time I would get near her, I would have this drop in thought that was so loud in my own thought's voice. And it just kept saying the same thing. It was the same sort of phrase over and over again. And it was like, it just said, ask about the light, ask about the light, ask about the light, ask about the light. And I was like, what is this? This is where did this come from? I don't even, because it was in my own thought's voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was clairaudient, but I didn't know that. And I was like, why do I feel like this? And it was this overwhelming, like almost anxious feeling I was getting. And it was only when I would be around her. So, and I knew her dad had died. So I was like, maybe this is something, but I'm just gonna go over here and like sit away from her. And so I tried to avoid her for the remainder of the day, because every time I got near her, the same phrase just kept popping in my head and I couldn't get rid of it. So this is like a really good, I think, sort of story about boundaries, because at that time I really didn't have any. I didn't know any better. And then when we were in the break room, we ended up having our lunch at the same time. I noticed that there was it started to come on again because we were sitting close to each other, and I finally was like, I just have to ask. Like, I don't know what else to do. We were talking about something totally unrelated, and at the time, Coca-Cola had, I don't know if you remember those bottles that had people's names on them.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah.
was like, have a Coke with, whomever. And there was a Coke bottle sitting on the table, like right in front of me, that someone had left. And it said, have a Coke with Robert. And it had the name Robert on it. And I had just glanced over it. And then at that point, the thought dropped in and kind of changed. And it said, that's my name. That's my name. That's my name. That's my name. And I went, okay. So then I just looked at her and I said, can I just ask you a question? I said, what was your dad's name? And she said, oh, his name was Robert. And I literally was like, okay, all right. And I said, can I just, and I asked for permission at that point. I said, hey, I think this is something that may be happening to me that I'm starting to explore. Are you comfortable if I ask you something or share something with you? And she said, yeah, sure. And I said, I've just had this overwhelming feeling, like maybe I'm feeling Robert's around. And I said, and I just feel this, this pull to ask you about the lights in your home. Is there something different with the lights, something going on with the lights? And she says, her jaw like dropped on the floor. And she said, yeah, just 2 nights ago, we started leaving the lights on for him overnight, because it's actually in their cultural tradition, when someone passes away, you leave the lights on for them overnight so they can find their way back to you.
Oh
And she just like was blown away. I was blown away. It was one of those moments where you go, whoa.
yeah.
I got to do something about this. So that was probably like the big sort of opening story that made me go, okay, there's a lot more to this than I think I fully understand or grasp, and I need to learn more. So that was really probably the biggest sort of story I have.
That's amazing. I mean, there's
Me.
so many elements having the name there in the physical. I
Yes.
mean, that just shows how amazing spirit can be. But weirdly, I'm like you. My banging stories are right at the beginning. Because I think once you start trying to develop it, that by default, because you're trying, you're getting in the way of it. And so there you don't get those moments where you just can't believe that they managed to get all of the stuff done that they did. It's so cool.
It's so cool.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So obviously you came to it and you had your own grief and your stuff like that. Here's a really deep philosophical question for you. What do you think the purpose of human life is?
Oh
Why do we come
gosh.
here?
Oh man, if I had an answer for that, wow, that's a really deep one.
I know. Just caught you off left field there.
I
What? Tell
know.
me.
I think without getting too heady about it, there is a part of me that does think that there's some sort of greater purpose for the existence of our human incarnation. Studied all sorts of texts and religions, and I don't know. I just
Yeah.
don't know. And I think it's the greatest mystery. And I think that there's beauty in mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to taint it with my own little human mind's worldview of like what the purpose is. But there is a part of me that does think that we're all just part of something greater, and we're all just
Mm-hmm.
an expression of that in our own individual ways. And it's almost like we're here to each have some kind of experience that um, allows us to more deeply understand the nature of the universe, like it's the microcosm and the macrocosm, like understand it in a tangible way. But yeah, but I feel like that changes, you know?
Yeah, I love that. No, I love it. I was like, oh, look at her go. I'm just going to enjoy this. But yeah, it's such a funny thing, isn't it? Because I also think that it's very relative. Like if somebody who just lost a child asked me that question, it's a very different response that you're able to give to just the sort of theory of it when you're in a good place. And it's, yeah, like you say, it's changing. It's so interesting. So you do one-on-one readings, you do demonstrations, you squash a lot of BS on TikTok
Mhm.
that I see. You get
Yeah.
annoyed with with the crowd. So while I've got you, here's the question I want to ask. If you were a complete muggle and you were just trying to find a good medium, what do you think that people should be looking for and be worried about when they're looking at a medium to work out if they're the one for them?
There's a lot of things you have to factor in. One of the biggest ones is I say if you adhere to any sort of belief or faith-based system to begin with, try to seek out someone who shares similar ideas and beliefs to you, to what you already are subscribed to. Because I have found that there's even in mediumistic spaces, even in the evidential space, there is a tendency, especially in the if you're going to mediums who are maybe newer in their development or maybe even underdeveloped, um, there's oftentimes this potential to impart or try to make meaning of, their sitter's lived experiences or the communicator's lived experiences. There's a lot of coloring that I think can happen.
Mhm.
So I think depending upon what you already adhere to, what you believe should really drive sort of where you look for someone to work with, or look for someone who really does their best to just give the evidence as it falls. And, the messages are in the evidence. They're not so much, it's not this bigger picture that they're trying to maybe infer, right? Or make
Yeah,
meaning of the lived experience of someone else. Um, so that would be my biggest
I
caveat.
love that.
Yeah, I think, and then the other thing, if you can, word of mouth is always, I think, the best way to find a medium.
Mm.
That's how a lot of my business comes in, is people tell their family and their friends, and so on and so forth. But if you can find, um, you know, if you can watch a medium work, whether they demonstrate publicly or they do live readings on a live platform, if you have the opportunity to see them read and you feel a resonance with the words they say, the way they deliver their messages, that in and of itself can be another good way to vet and find the right medium that you want to work with for you. So,
Absolutely. I mean, that's how I inboxed you and got you on the podcast. So I love it. Okay, what is one myth that you wish you could bust about mediumship? What would you, if you could say anything, you could shout at everyone in the world, what would it be?
we are not on all the time. We are
Yes.
not constantly, when we're around people, we are not constantly feeling out who's around you, what's going on. We're not looking, we're not doing that. I think TV and media has portrayed mediumship in such a way that the public has this huge misconception about how mediumship works and about how mediums are. I
Mm.
mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I've been around even family when I've explained to them that's not how this works. They're like, "Oh, what does my so and so say about that?" And I'm just like, I'm eating.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I'm
for
not
sure.
I'm not tapped in right now, you know?
Yeah.
So I think if that was that would probably be my biggest misconception, but also that mediumship is not a silver bullet either. A medium reading is not always going to be the thing that it's not going to be, it's going to be what you need and not necessarily what you want. And I think people need to also realize that, because I think a lot of times people think that the mediumship or having a medium reading is going to cure grief or it's going to fix everything. And the truth is, if we become so hyper focused on what we think the reading should look like, or we're so hyper focused on hearing about certain things, or we could miss an entirely huge opportunity to have an experience with our loved ones, if we become very narrow minded. So that would be the other caveat I would say as well.
Yeah.
If anything, I don't know if you found this in your journey, but I found that when I was on the receiving end of a mediumship reading, one that was very powerful, I've only had a few, outside of development circles that are very, very moving. They actually open up new layers of grief that maybe you thought you had worked through, that actually it's okay, it's time to work on this. It's like an onion. So that's something I think also that would be a misconception that I would clear up, or a myth.
Yeah, I love that. I know when my grandmother passed, and everyone said, "Well, you won't be upset," and I was like, "Well, I will, because she's not here in the same way that she was. So I still miss her, still want to see her." So absolutely, it does open up layers, exactly like you said. Going back to your origin story at the beginning, how are your family with you doing this for a living then? If when you were little they were like, "That's nice, dear," and pushed it away, are they more open to it now? Are they more receptive, or is it just not talked about?
To be honest, it's something that isn't really discussed. It's kind of a topic that no, not many family members actually ask about, which I appreciate. And I think it's interesting though, because the family members who I think would have had an issue with it are all in spirit now. So more so it was like my dad is incredibly supportive, and he was one of the people that I thought was going to just kind of give me the side eye. And to a degree I think he does, but he's very, very supportive. But other extended family members and things like that, it's not something that's really touched on too much, which is okay, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, I have some family members that it's just we never talk about what I do. We just never mention it. It's just never comes up in conversation. Never housework, you're busy, nothing. It's like it just hasn't happened. And that's okay. I respect that. That's have you ever had anyone come through on a reading yet who comes in with the like, "I never believed in this when I was here"?
Oh yeah.
Isn't it hilarious? I love it. I'm always like, "Oh, hi, welcome."
It's one of the funniest things too, because for me, it's almost like I feel like they're going to come in a way that you as the medium would recognize that aspect of their personality. And I often find it's the ones who are kind of like, they just kind of drippity drop a little evidence here and there. I call it like putting their toe in the water, where they're, and I'm like, would it make sense to say that they really would not have been into this when they were alive? Oh yeah, like deeply religious kind of.
It's so funny, isn't it? I had a guy on Thursday night at Gem. First thing he said to me was, "I thought this was a crock of shit when I was here." And I was like, "Oh, hi, welcome," because it just makes me laugh. But they still come through. It doesn't stop them coming through. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. If you had one piece of advice for a developing medium, what would you say to them?
Don't compare yourself to other mediums. That would probably be it. Watch other mediums for the sake of watching and learning, and learn what you like, learn what you don't like, learn about, kind of how do you want to show up in the world in your mediumship. Get really clear on what your why is, and check back in with your why very frequently. And don't be concerned with how long it takes to develop and unfold. The development process is lifelong, and it's going to ebb and it's going to flow. You're going to go through expansion and contraction where you feel like you're really connected, and then you're going to go through periods where you feel like you are having a hard time and a rough go, and that's totally normal. I think the other piece of advice that I would give to someone who's developing would be, live your life. Don't make mediumship your entire life. You don't want to spend more time talking to the dead than you do to the living. Because the more life you live, the more experience you have, the more spirit can trigger and communicate through you,
Use that.
Yeah.
Amazing. That was really great advice. So let's talk about what you offer. You do online readings for people. You've got online demonstrations. Obviously, as regular listeners will know, I will put your website in the show notes so they can check. But you also do mentoring, both one-on-one and in groups, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And I can really feel that teacher vibe coming off you. I think you love teaching. Is that right?
I do. I love teaching. I it's something that I've always loved. Even when I was doing nursing full time, I loved precepting. Teaching is just something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, amazing. Good. So everyone can check that out. So what's next for you? What have you got plans for the future? Do you know where you're heading or what you're aiming for or what's going on?
It's really interesting because I find that healing is integral, and it's throughout my journey in mediumship, one thing I have found is that there is something to be said for the human connection. And I get that in nursing a lot. So I feel like there's been some overlap there. And I feel that I'm really centered on wanting to be able to work with people, not just using mediumship and psychic and intuitive work, but I also do feel there's a counseling aspect that I am really looking forward to developing as well professionally.
Wow.
And moving into the therapeutic space. I currently work in like as a nurse, my nursing life, but it all kind of intertwines because I currently do work in the field of psychedelic assisted therapy. So that is sort of something that I think long term I would love to be able to integrate in some way into how I show up in the world as medium, therapist, and and a nurse. So
all around great girl. But I mean, that's what it's all of mediumship, I think, comes down to healing, doesn't it? We want people to feel better. And whether that is finding a path through their grief by knowing their loved ones are still around, or working with healing energy and making the change you need, or opening up to your potential, it's still about someone being better than they were when they joined you. So completely get that. Now, a couple of last little questions. Do you ever work with cards, oracle cards or tarot cards or anything like that?
Yes, I do actually. So I work with tarot cards. I do work with oracle cards, and this is something I did forget to tell you about. But I actually run a tarot like practice circle with a friend of mine. And we do this over Zoom, and we help people learn how to intuitively work with their tarot cards to read for themselves, and then in turn also help them get more comfortable reading the cards for others. So discussing and playing with tarot. So yeah.
And that would be traditional tarot.
Traditional tarot.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So while I've got you, have you got a pack of cards that you recommend, a particular tarot or oracle card set? Which would you recommend?
Well, I'm a sucker for the original, the Rider Smith Waite, just because I feel like if you're learning or new to the cards, those cards really kind of tell stories in their imagery, which can be really helpful in learning the cards and actually being able to see patterns when you lay the cards out in front of you. They're very visual, but I'm not gonna lie, I am kind of a fiend for this Light Seers Tarot.
It's beautiful, that set, isn't it?
It's
Absolutely
gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. I love it. So yeah, that's probably my favorite tarot deck that I have at the moment. So
amazing. Oh, if you're like me, it changes as well.
oh
like,
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, today, this is my favorite. And do you have a book that you would recommend, or a couple of books that you would recommend for people who want to expand their knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most helpful books that I read was a book, Magician to Mystic. I don't know if you're familiar with that one by Simon James and Brian Robertson.
I'm gonna write it down. Okay.
It really is it's an amazing book that kind of just goes into more of it kind of looks at mediumship through more of a esoteric lens, which I think is really beautiful. And then the other book, of course, Janet Nahavik, Between, I think, oh gosh, I always get that one. Is it Between Two Worlds?
I think so.
Yeah, it's so bad because I get that one and then the Between Two Worlds and Where Two Worlds Meet. I can't ever
Oh, no, I'm not
remember.
sure, but I know the one you mean. I've read that one.
Yeah. Janet Nahovec is the author. I think it's maybe her only book. I really love that one. I don't necessarily adhere to kind of like the structure anymore, the checklist sort of way of interviewing spirits. I don't really do that anymore,
Me
but I
either.
think it has a lot of foundational information that can be really helpful in the beginning of the development process.
Agreed. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy just to hear your stories, your opinions, your journey. It's been really lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity to sit with you and chat with you. This has been amazing.
I've loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.